Adrian Belew has played with David Bowie, Talking Heads, and King Crimson. His ear for guitar genius is not casual. These are the 6 players he calls the real thing.
And the finest and the best musicians are the ones who have passion and dedication.
Number 6, Frank Zappa. Most people remember Frank Zappa as a provocateur, the guy who testified before Congress, the man who named his children Moon Unit and Dweezil. What gets buried under that reputation is the guitar playing. Zappa treats the instrument like a problem he refuses to solve the obvious way. His solos are angular, rhythmically ferocious, and harmonically unpredictable, built from a vocabulary that owes nothing to the blues box that defined almost everyone else in rock. Belew did not encounter Zappa from a distance. He auditioned for Zappa's band and won the spot. He toured with Zappa in the late 1970s. That experience cracked open what Belew believed a rock guitar could actually do. Zappa once said, "The guitar is just a way of getting the music out. The music is what matters." For Belew, that philosophy was not a slogan. It was a master class delivered every single night on stage. Zappa never repeated a solo. Every night was a fresh interrogation of what the song could hold. That commitment to spontaneity, to treating the electric guitar as a compositional tool rather than a showpiece, is exactly what earned Zappa this spot. The provocateur badge is real, but behind it is one of the most original guitar minds rock ever produced. And Belew was close enough to see exactly how it worked. What separates Zappa from his contemporaries is not just the strangeness, it is the discipline underneath the strangeness. His compositions are intricate, sometimes notated with an almost classical rigor, yet his guitar solos burst out of that structure with total improvisational freedom. That contrast between the tightly constructed and the completely unleashed is what made audiences lean forward and musicians take notes. Zappa built his own lane and never left it. He never chased a hit format. He never softened a difficult idea to make it easier to sell. The discography he left behind spans more than 60 studio albums across genres that sometimes did not even have names yet. For a guitarist like Belew, someone who has spent his own career refusing the obvious move, Zappa was not just an employer. He was proof that artistic stubbornness, when backed by real technique, produces something that outlasts every trend it refuses to join. Zappa did not play like a genius because he practiced genius. He played like one because he genuinely could not play any other way. And that is exactly the kind of player Belew puts on this list. Number 5, Robert Fripp. There is a version of the guitar that is clean, controlled, and almost frighteningly precise. Robert Fripp owns that version completely. Fripp is the co-founder and creative engine of King Crimson, the band that has been redefining progressive rock across multiple decades and multiple lineups. His playing is not about heat or abandon. It is about architecture. Every note is placed with an intention that borders on surgical. His use of odd time signatures and dissonant chord structures forced an entire generation of guitarists to reconsider what the instrument was even for. The connection to Belew here is direct and documented. Belew joined King Crimson and became Fripp's co-guitarist across multiple eras of the band. The two of them built one of the most distinctive twin guitar sounds in rock history. Fripp's precision locked against Belew's texture and experimentation. Working alongside Fripp, Belew says, forced him to be more rigorous, more deliberate, more honest about what he was actually playing. Fripp also developed a solo performance system called Frippertronics, a live tape loop approach that turned a single guitar into a layered, evolving soundscape performed entirely without a band. That willingness to rebuild the context around the guitar, not just the notes inside it, is what separates Fripp from his peers. He does not just play the instrument differently, he rethinks what the instrument is doing in the room. For Belew, that quality of mind is the definition of genius, and Fripp has never stopped demonstrating it. Fripp once said, "The music is not in the guitar, the music is in the silence between the notes." That statement lands differently when you have heard Fripp play. He means it literally. His rests are as deliberate as his strikes. The space he leaves is as constructed as the sound he makes. That level of intentionality, where even the absence of playing is a decision, is something most guitarists never reach, and most listeners never consciously notice. Fripp builds it into every performance anyway. King Crimson's debut album, In the Court of the Crimson King, released in 1969, reached number 5 on the UK albums chart. It is widely regarded as one of the founding documents of progressive rock. Fripp has steered the band through dissolution, reformation, and reinvention multiple times since. Always on his own terms, always with that same uncompromising precision at the center. Belew does not place Fripp here out of loyalty to a bandmate. He places him here because Fripp represents something rare, a guitarist who made the instrument smarter just by picking it up. That is a standard Belew holds himself to every time he plays. If you want to test how well you know the guitarists Adrian Belew calls genius, there is a full quiz linked in the description. Go check it out. Number 4. Jeff Beck. Jeff Beck does something on the guitar that almost no one can replicate. He makes the instrument sound like it is breathing. Beck came up in the same London scene that produced Eric Clapton and Jimmy Page. All three passed through the Yardbirds. Only one of them spent a career refusing to settle into a style. Beck never stops moving. He pivots from blues to jazz fusion to orchestral rock, to something that has no name yet. His 1975 album Blow by Blow reached number 4 on the Billboard 200 without a single vocalist. A nearly impossible commercial result for an instrumental record at that moment in pop music. What makes Beck genuinely extraordinary, and what Belew has pointed to repeatedly, is his relationship with the tremolo arm, what most players call a whammy bar. Beck does not use it as a trick, he uses it as a primary expressive voice. His control of pitch through that arm is so nuanced that he can replicate the inflection of a human voice, a steel guitar, or a sound that has no obvious reference point at all. He famously plays without a pick, using only his fingers and the bar to generate tone, dynamics, and melody simultaneously. Beck won 8 Grammy Awards across his career and was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2009. But the trophy count is almost beside the point. What Belew hears in Beck is someone for whom the guitar is genuinely alive, not a fixed object producing fixed sounds, but a responsive, unpredictable partner. That is a standard almost no one reaches. Beck reached it on almost every record he made. Beck once said, "I always felt the guitar could do anything. I just had to find out what that was." That restlessness is the thread running through his entire catalog. He was never satisfied with the sound he already had. Every album was an argument for a different possibility. Blow by Blow sounds nothing like Wired. Wired sounds nothing like Guitar Shop. And yet every one of those records is unmistakably Beck, because what stays constant is not the style, it is the curiosity. Belew is himself a player defined by curiosity, by the search for tones and textures that have no obvious precedent. So, when Belew looks at Beck, he is not just admiring technique. He is recognizing a shared refusal to accept that the guitar has already said everything it has to say. For Belew, that refusal is not a personality trait. It is the price of entry into the conversation about genius. And Beck paid it every single time he plugged in. Number 3. Jimi Hendrix. Every conversation about guitar genius arrives here eventually. The question is not whether Jimi Hendrix belongs. The question is what specifically made him so unreachable. Hendrix released his debut album, Are You Experienced, in 1967. It reached number 2 on the UK albums chart and number 5 on the Billboard 200 in the United States. Those numbers are remarkable. What is more remarkable is what is inside the record. In a single album, Hendrix introduces a new vocabulary of distortion, feedback, and stereo panning that changes the grammar of rock guitar permanently. No one had assembled those elements that way before. Almost no one has equaled them since. For Belew, Hendrix is the unavoidable starting point, the player who expanded the idea of what the electric guitar could be before most of his contemporaries had finished figuring out what it already was. Hendrix treats feedback not as noise to be avoided, but as a tonal resource to be shaped and directed. He plays behind his back, with his teeth, with his whole body. But the showmanship is never the point. The point is that every sonic experiment he runs on stage actually works musically. The theatrics and the substance arrive together. Hendrix once said, "Music doesn't lie. If there is something to be changed in this world, then it can only happen through music." For a player like Belew, someone who built his entire career on texture, experimentation, and the search for sounds that had never existed before, Hendrix is not just an influence. He is the proof that the guitar has no ceiling. Belew has said in multiple interviews that Hendrix remains the player he keeps returning to. That level of sustained fascination from someone who has heard everything tells you everything you need to know. What Hendrix accomplished in a career that lasted only a handful of years at full visibility is staggering by any measure. 3 studio albums, a live performance at Woodstock in 1969 that remains one of the most discussed moments in rock history, a body of recorded work that musicians and producers still study today, not as a historical artifact, but as an active resource. The guitar Hendrix played was a standard instrument. Nothing about the hardware was exotic. What was exotic was the mind operating it, the absolute refusal to treat the electric guitar as a device with defined limits. Every sound he found was a door he kicked open for everyone who came after. Belew walked through several of those doors himself. Placing Hendrix at number 3 is not a slight. It is a measure of how extraordinary the 2 names above him have to be. Number 2, Eddie Van Halen. In 1978, a debut album from a band nobody had heard of lands in record stores across the United States. Within weeks, every guitarist in the country is trying to figure out what they just heard on the opening track. That track is Eruption. It runs for 1 minute and 42 seconds. It rewrites the rules of the instrument inside those 102 seconds completely. Eddie Van Halen popularizes a 2-handed tapping technique, hammering notes on the fretboard with both hands simultaneously, that transforms what a single guitarist can produce without any accompaniment. The technique existed before Van Halen. What did not exist was someone deploying it with that speed, that melodic intelligence, and that pure physical joy. Van Halen does not sound like he is working. He sounds like he is playing, in the truest, most effortless sense of that word. The self-titled debut album reaches number 19 on the Billboard 200 and goes on to be certified platinum 10 times over in the United States. But again, the commercial story undersells the artistic one. Every guitarist who comes after Van Halen has to reckon with what he did. The instrument has a different ceiling after Eruption, a much higher one. Belew has spoken openly about Van Halen's impact. What he emphasizes is not the technical fireworks alone, it is the musicality underneath them. Van Halen never loses the song inside the solo. The speed is real, the feeling is realer. Van Halen also built his own guitars, rewired his own electronics, and chased a specific tone for years before finding it. A dedication to the instrument as a craft object, not just a performance tool. For Belew, that combination of physical invention, emotional directness, and relentless sonic curiosity places Van Halen in a category that almost no one else occupies. What Van Halen did to the guitar in the late 1970s cannot be undone. That is what genius looks like when it arrives without warning. Van Halen once said, "I just want to play music. I don't think about what I'm doing technically." That instinctive relationship with the instrument is precisely what made the technical achievement so devastating. He was not calculating the effect. He was chasing the feeling, and the effect arrived anyway, fully formed, at a level no one had reached before him. That gap between effort and result, between how hard it looked and how natural it sounded, is the signature of the genuinely gifted. Belew occupies a very different corner of the guitar world from Van Halen. The textures, the experimentation, the avant-garde leanings. On the surface, these are different conversations. But Belew has always been clear. Genius does not have to look like your own work. It just has to be undeniable. Van Halen was undeniable from the first note of that debut record, and he stayed undeniable for decades. Placing him at number 2 is not a compliment. It is an assessment, and Belew makes it without hesitation. Number 1. Django Reinhardt. Wait, Hendrix already appeared at number 3. That means the player Belew places above everyone, the one he returns to above all others, is someone different entirely. The guitarist at the top of this list is one whose influence runs so deep that most players absorb it without ever realizing where it came from. That guitarist is Django Reinhardt. Reinhardt emerges from the jazz manouche tradition in 1930s Europe and builds a guitar language so singular, so structurally inventive, that it cannot be traced to any direct predecessor. Here is what makes this selection almost impossible to fully absorb. Reinhardt loses the use of 2 fingers on his fretting hand in a caravan fire in 1928. He is left with full function in only his index finger and middle finger on that hand. He develops an entirely new approach to chord voicings and melodic runs, using those two fingers and two partially functional fingers for certain chords, and then produces a body of work that remains nearly a century later, technically and musically extraordinary by any standard. Think about that. The technique he invents out of necessity becomes the technique that defines him. What looks like a limitation becomes the engine of his genius. Reinhardt co-founds the Quintet du Haut Club de France with violinist Stéphane Grappelli in 1934. The group records prolifically through the 1930s and 40s, producing a catalog that guitarists still study today. His composition, Minor Swing, becomes one of the most performed pieces in jazz guitar history. Reinhardt once said, "I am a musician, I play." That simplicity is almost misleading. The music underneath it is anything but simple. It is harmonically rich, rhythmically propulsive, and emotionally immediate in a way that crosses every genre boundary the decades since have tried to build. For Belew, a man who has played with David Bowie on the Isolar 2 World Tour, contributed to Talking Heads' seminal live, Records Stop Making Sense, and built one of the most distinctive guitar voices in progressive rock across his work with King Crimson. The name at the top is not a rock player. It is not a technician defined by speed. It is a man who played with two working fingers and changed everything anyway. Belew has described Reinhardt as proof that genius is not about what you have available. It is about what you do with it. That idea runs through every name on this list. Zappa refused the obvious vocabulary. Fripp refused the obvious context. Beck refused the obvious style. Hendrix refused the obvious ceiling. Van Halen refused the obvious limit of what two hands could do. And Reinhardt refused to let a fire end a conversation he had barely started. Each of these players arrived at genius from a completely different direction. What they share is that none of them accepted the instrument as they found it. For a guitarist like Belew, who has spent his entire career asking what the guitar can still become, that shared refusal is not incidental. It is the point. It is the reason these 6 names and no others appear on this list. Every name here earned its place the same way, by making the guitar say something no one had heard before and no one has been able to take back since. Reinhardt did it first, did it under conditions that should have made it impossible, and did it so completely that a century later, players are still catching up. That is not just number 1. That is the definition of the whole conversation. 6 guitarists, 6 completely different reasons to call someone a genius. Frank Zappa, who never played the obvious note. Robert Fripp, who turned discipline into its own kind of freedom. Each name on Belew's list points to the same truth. Genius on the guitar is not about speed, fame, or record sales. It is about finding a sound that could not have come from anyone else. Belew knows this firsthand. He has spent his own career doing exactly that, bending sounds into shapes nobody had names for, working alongside the most original musical minds of his generation, and earning the credibility to make a list like this one mean something. When a player of that caliber calls another guitarist a genius, it is not flattery, it is recognition. One rare mind seeing another clearly. Drop your take in the comments. Tell us who you would put on your list. And if you are serious about your guitar knowledge, subscribe. There is more where this came from. And if you want to find out how well you really know these 6 players, the full quiz is waiting for you in the link in the description. Go find out how you score, because genius is easy to admire, but hard to truly understand.